Hey guys, we are going to start back up with our notes. This is for Monday the 20th and Tuesday the 21st, 8A and B Day. And so we're going to pick back up. We finished with John Brown last class before break, and looking at kind of where we were 1855, 1856. So now we're going to kind of look at the spread of or the beginning of some new political parties and another huge decision that really kind of sparked and led to the Civil War. So we're going to talk a little bit here. We have the rise of the Republicans. As you can see, most people coming into the country usually tended to become part of the Democratic Party. That's not anything new. That happened all the way back since parties kind of formed with the Democratic Republicans, and they transitioned with Jackson once that party died. In the North, with the Whigs collapse, you have this void, and you have two political parties look to fill that space. They are the Know Nothing Party, who are also referred to as the American Party, and the Republicans. For the most part, both look and kind of are building on somewhat nativist and nationalist platforms. The Know Nothings, especially, as you see, one of the big things that they are is very anti-immigrant. Both are somewhat staunchly anti-Catholic. And this is, again, unfortunately, a pretty prominent idea and theory is there's a lot of racism, not just against blacks and natives and Mexicans at this time, after the Mexican-American War. You also have that against Italian and Irish immigrants coming in who are Catholic. And so basically, if you're not white and Protestant, you're not really well liked or respected as you come in. Hold on. But you see kind of where the two-party platforms really kind of start off. The Know Nothings, again, big in New England, want checks and caps on immigration. The Republicans are a little bit further west, the Midwest, Ohio, Illinois, very anti-slavery. A lot of what you can tell about the party is what they're stand against, not necessarily what they stand for. Again, they don't like slavery. They don't like Catholics. They're not wild about immigrants. But neither really, they don't necessarily have a platform of what they are and what they want to do. So they weren't necessarily rivals. Both kind of realized that they needed to stand up and work together to defeat the Democratic candidates. In 1854, it's not really necessarily clear as to who is going to be the one to kind of step forward and be kind of dominant between the two. One big thing that will happen going forward is that we will see the Know Nothings are going to kind of fall off, especially because they can't decide how they feel about the Kansas-Nebraska Act. We talked before break about how Kansas-Nebraska Act was really seen as this part of the slave power conspiracy. Again, we're getting rid of previously agreed upon lines with the Missouri Compromise and everything else. We're going to allow slavery to go further and further north with this whole idea of popular sovereignty. And so a lot of people were upset about that. The fact that the Know Nothings didn't really take a hard stand against it. Also, immigration kind of started to slow in the late 1850s. And if your whole platform is really like centered around being anti-immigrant and you don't have a lot of immigrants coming in, it's not really a hot button issue. And so their party kind of starts to dwindle and decline, and we see a lot more of these people move to the Republican Party and kind of catch on with them. One of the big things that really, in a very unfortunate way, what boosts kind of sentiment toward the Republican Party will happen with this assault that happens in the U.S. Senate with the famous Brooks Sumner incident. So Charles Sumner went on and made this great speech blasting against slavery and the slave power conspiracy. And Congressman Preston Brooks from South Carolina apparently had enough, and so went to Brooks's office in the Senate and met with him then. The fight kind of spills out, and basically Brooks starts beating him with a cane. Both sides kind of use this as, again, further evidence to support their side. People in the North look at this. This is the unhinged slave power trying to silence free speech. Brooks sees this, people in the South see Brooks as this hero for somebody who's standing up for what he believes in and not going to be pushed around by the elitists in the North, and having them, tell us what we can and can't do. So he is forced to resign after this, but he will win re-election later. And so there's really not any punishment that really happens to Brooks after assaulting Sumner. So moving forward, we go to the election of 1856. I know usually I have 3 slides. Sorry, we've got 5. We've got a lot to talk to this class, or this session with notes. The know-nothings for the most part are non-existent by 1856. And so most of those people that support them move to the Republican Party. Those who are left within the know-nothings in this American Party choose Millard Fillmore. They figure he was a nice enough guy, was president early in the 1850s before as he took over for Taylor. Republicans put John Fremont up, who is from California. Big thing is that they're going to prohibit slavery in new territories. They also want to push the railroad. That's a big thing that they try to do. And Democrats choose James Buchanan. And again, it shows you how bad Franklin Pierce was, that as a president who could have been reelected, that his own party didn't even want to put him back up. So again, they feel he's unpopular. The whole Onset Manifesto and annexation of Cuba thing that he got caught with was seen as a disaster. And so they go with Buchanan. They figure that he's somebody that certainly will win the South and maybe can win a little bit from the North, which he does, and he becomes president. Republicans, though, are pretty optimistic. Fillmore is a non-factor in the whole election. For the most part, Fremont does a whole lot better than most people thought. So for their first election, really on stage, the Republicans are doing well, and they feel that with the right candidate and right things moving forward, that this could be 1860 could potentially be their year. So we move from 1856, get a little bit into James Buchanan, and unfortunately, my notes aren't going through piece by piece where they go through and you can only focus on one thing because this would be necessary. But anyway, we have Buchanan. He's considered a very safe choice. But like a lot of his predecessors, he seems to give in to many pro-slavery and pro-Southern demands, even though Buchanan is not a Southerner. And in his inauguration address, Buchanan does something kind of odd. He goes through and he mentions that there's this upcoming court case and that public should accept the court's decision, kind of trying to go through and say that, we know what we're doing, just don't get too alarmed and upset by this, which kind of foreshadowing is not going to go well. So the case he's talking about is Dred Scott, which is arguably probably one of the worst 2 Supreme Court decisions made in the history of the United States. Plessy Ferguson probably being the other. So here, a little background on it. Some of you are doing your causes video on this. Dred Scott was a slave who accompanied his master to Illinois and the Wisconsin Territory. Basically goes to the courts being like, I lived in these free states and territories. I shouldn't be a slave. And he has people that kind of help him. His case finally goes all the way up to the Supreme Court in 1857. And this is the verdict that is given, that Scott could not sue for his freedom because blacks don't have the same rights as whites. And that just because he stayed in Illinois and Wisconsin, that did not make him free. And so a lot of people are certainly going to be outraged by this. They basically go through and say that blacks, again, the whole idea that blacks do not have the same rights as whites. I mean, blacks had voted, blacks had fought in Revolutionary War and War of 1812, and had done many of the same things that whites had, and absolutely are part of that whole unalienable right. Some had done that, that hadn't necessarily lived their lives in slavery, and so a lot of people are rightfully and justifiably outraged by this. Again, the North is horrified by all of this. It's further evidence of this slave power conspiracy that not only has taken over Congress, but also the Supreme Court now, the Justice Branch, or Judicial Branch, rather. And again, the North really feels this. The North is much more populated than the South is, yet the South is still able to pass all of these laws and have all of these seemingly pro-slavery agenda passed and whatnot. So Republicans feel that Buchanan knew about the result before it was given, which obviously is a big no-no. Like, there's supposed to be division of powers and checks and balances and all that. The good news for Scott to go and keep it on him, the sons of his previous owner actually go and set him free. So for Dred Scott, it doesn't end up all bad, but this becomes a huge rallying point for Republicans, as how Democrats and everybody else has purposely gone to try to undermine what they've been trying to do. This whole idea of popular sovereignty. You can't say that we can vote on slavery, and if we live in Wisconsin, we don't want slavery. If you can then say that people can move to Wisconsin or Illinois and have slaves, that's not what these laws mean, but that's what the Supreme Court's interpretation was. So those are not good. And then lastly, we'll touch on the Panic of 1857, where the U.S. industry is hit by a quick depression. There's massive unemployment, especially in the North, because that's where all the industry is. Buchanan and the Democrats in Congress do very little. They felt that the federal government should not get involved in economic matters. And so Republican efforts to pass tariffs and help themselves are blocked by the Democrats in Congress. And again, more and more people in the North, and because there were some Northern Democrats at this time, are going to leave the party, and the Republican Party is really, really going to get a lot of numbers moving forward in the North and in the Midwest and in the West. As we move forward to the 1858 midterm elections and then move into 1860, the Republicans are going to be a serious challenger to the Democratic Party. So that's where we're at in 1857. That was a lot. If you have questions, email me, send me messages through Remind. And that's it. Y'all have a good one.